I would argue that the FDA as currently configured is incapable of protecting America against another Vioxx. We are virtually defenseless.
Who owns the FDA? The drug industry or the people? To be raising such a question in one of the world's most senior medical journals shows that there is a massive crisis of legitimacy at the FDA.
The major issue Americans confront today is the fact that the FDA acts to protect the financial interests of the pharmaceutical industry as opposed to the health of the American public.
Within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, about 80% of the resources are geared towards the approval of new drugs, and 20% is for everything else. Drug safety is about 5%. Congress has created that structure by PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, by which drug companies pay money to FDA so that FDA will review and approve its drugs. For industry, every day that a drug is held up from being marketed, in their minds, that's another $1 to $2 million of profit that they're being denied. And so the incentive is really review the drugs as quickly as possible, approve them as quickly as possible, and don't stand in the way of our making profit. And FDA cooperates with that mandate.
The regulated activities of the Food and Drug Administration are in large measure financed directly by the pharmaceutical companies.
More than 50% of the money that the FDA spends reviewing drugs comes from the pharmaceutical companies. Many people see that as an absurd conflict of interest, and indeed many are calling for an end to such user pays funding.
And once that funding started coming from the drug companies, they started calling the shots. And basically they said, we're not going to continue to provide this funding unless you help us get these drugs to market. So basically the FDA got marching orders in the mid-90s, started helping bring drugs to market, do it quickly, and they basically have served those masters ever since.
As a drug chemist, I discovered that FDA drug approval wasn't based on science. It was based on financial conflict, where 6 out of 10 scientists who have financial conflicts of interest say, yes, this drug should be approved.
When you look at the experts who are on television commenting on a story, or on some of the physician websites that are out there that are increasingly popular, or who may be providing testimony to Congress, if you look at their backgrounds and where their money comes from, in the vast majority of cases, unfortunately, it comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And whether they declare the bias or not, they are clearly influenced by who's paying the bill.
I think a lot of people think that the approval of drugs by the FDA is tantamount to the FDA guaranteeing that the drug is safe as well as effective. And the truth of the matter is, we never know that to a certainty.
Scientific studies that are funded by industry are 5 times more likely to show a result that's favorable to drug companies than if the study was funded by an independent source like the National Institutes of Health.
A pharmaceutical company does a drug test, and it gets, or maybe it does 8 studies, let's say, and 6 of them are negative. Well, it publishes the 2 positive ones. So we only have 2 positive results, and the public and doctors, in fact, the medical journals themselves don't know that in 6 of the 8 trials the drug failed.
Drugs never cure disease. They only change the form and location. When drugs are introduced into the system, for a time they may seem to have beneficial effect. A change may take place, but the disease is not cured. It will manifest itself in some other form.
The drug industry's put an awful lot of muscle on Congress and on the FDA to keep drugs that are profitable on the market. For a doctor like me, it puts us in an impossible position because drugs that should have been withdrawn may last for months or even years beyond the point where we knew they were dangerous. When I was invited by Senator Grassley's office to testify, I was faced with this dilemma. Do I sort of lay it on the line and tell them the way it really is, or do I kind of downplay it? And there are ways of doing that. But what I concluded was that I'm now being given the opportunity to tell the truth. If I don't tell them the truth, then I'm now responsible, in part, for the deaths of people that happen in the future. and I'm basically a co-conspirator.
The FDA says because we don't regulate them heavily enough, the supplements therefore could be dangerous. And yet, if you look at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, if you look at their data, it reveals that there aren't any fatalities, that there aren't any significant injuries from the use of dietary supplements, whereas adverse reactions to prescription drugs are one of the leading causes of death in this country.
The estimate was 100,000 deaths every year from adverse drug reactions, and in addition, 1.5 million people injured so seriously from adverse drug reactions that they had to be hospitalized.
More deaths have been caused by drug taking than all other causes combined. If there was in the land one physician in the place of thousands, a vast amount of premature deaths would be prevented. Multitudes of physicians and multitudes of drugs have cursed the inhabitants of the earth and have taken thousands and tens of thousands to untimely graves.
Now here's a familiar scene: children running, people walking through fields of flowers, and they're smiling, and there's patriotism, and everybody's just smiling and hugging family members. These are scenes that you see in these drug commercials, and then at the end of all this, you hear this.
Side effects may include nausea, diarrhea, constipation, dizziness, sweating, tremor, sexual side effects, injury, yawn, abnormal vision, or sleep.
Direct-to-consumer advertising has just elicited this wave of demand, false demand. And then the doctors are just saying, okay, you want this drug, you want the purple pill, here's your script.